book and understanding to survive and analyze your problems without being blind, without being blind.
Talking to my carcass and how I should have done
Back
harvest.
after a long hiatus from Ascend Your Podcast, we are finally back, and we got a special interviewee to bring us back to the show. We got Nick. I forgot his last name.
Tvrdy.
And that's
Tvrdy.
Nick from Creighton. How's it going?
It's going real well, guys. How are you? It's another day, another dollar. I don't know what to say, but it's an honor to be here. It's great to be at the back of a revival of this thing.
Well, we really appreciate it. It's great to have you to bring us back with a bang to 2021. You know, it's great to have a dear old friend. Shout out to all Cortina community out there that might be joining me.
And Gallagher. Can't forget about Gallagher. Oh, G-Town.
2G, baby.
Oh, yeah.
Shout out my roommate, Mitchell Hagan, Patrick McMullen.
Yeah. Nice. Oh, yeah, man. Dewan. We had Javi and Weston on that floor. The list goes on, but yeah, this is fun. This is fun.
Awesome, man. Well, you want to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're up to, stuff like that.
Yeah. So, name's Nick Tvrdy. I am currently residing in the south end of Denver, Colorado, Highlands Ranch, which is just a fancy place for people to move to from out of state, right? My roommates are from California. I'm from Nebraska, and I moved here a little over a year ago, chasing a dream selling solar panels. So the first couple companies that I started with out here didn't work out too well, and so then I tried starting my own business and doing like an energy efficiency thing with it. But then Corona hit, and so I wound up taking a detour into life insurance, which I'm now actually taking my life back out of. So life insurance was fun. It was cool. I got pretty good at that. I was helping train and build out recruiting stuff for an agency. Just wasn't paying well, wasn't feeding my soul. So now I'm getting back into solar, and I've got some crazy high ambitions. I want to earn a lot of money with it so that I can then reinvest into community solar projects and ways for like there to be almost like liberation type systems in place for communities to take care of their needs through sustainable and renewable living. So that's what I'm getting into, and that's what I'm talking about, along with a lot of other things. And I've got some textbooks over here to dig through and pull out if need be. But do you wanna go through like those series of questions you guys have, or do you have any other questions that you'd rather ask instead?
Well, I think that's a great segue, Nick, because I think there's a lot of people like Ryan and I whose knowledge on renewables are quite limited. Like we all kind of know it's a good thing, but like our knowledge on it is kind of limited. So I guess it'd be a good starting point or a good foundation to kind of establish like what are renewable energies, like what are some examples of that, and like why are they a good thing?
Great question. So the simplest way that I can put it, while also not being simple at all, because that's how I tend to be, guys. Fair warning. I think of things in such great depth, but it's all the same concept. So when it comes to renewable energy, it's really just anything that is within the biosphere of the planet and gets replenished over the course of 40 to 60 years at most. In most cases, it's like a plant regrows over the course of a year, et cetera, et cetera. So plant matter is within the atmospheric conditions that our planet exists right now in. So the reason why fossil fuels isn't so great in comparison to renewable resources, which can include biomass, can include wind, water, and of course solar, those don't actually introduce old carbon like fossil fuels does. So dead plant and animal matter from 756 million years ago or something like that. That's the youngest fossil fuels is almost a billion years ago, and we use it because it's a really dense source of energy. So it's obviously helped humanity expand at a rapid pace that is almost too fast, right? We've been producing so much that now our planet's kind of spinning off its axis in a way, and we're polluting the oceans. Oh my gosh, we're tearing up our soil and depleting our entire ability to stay on top of agriculture for the long haul. There's so many ways that we're out of whack, if you will. And what it is that I feel like we're doing to bring it back to this renewable energy and why that's good, and why the opposite isn't good. Renewable energy isn't trying to mess with how nature does things. It's trying to mimic it in the best of scenarios. So, for example, instead of using corn and replanting that as a crop every single year, or soybeans, or even wheat, we actually have to plant it every single year, then harvest it, and then let the land lie fallow. Every fourth year they like rotate crops out and stuff like that. What they're doing with modern farming practices is they're just taking too much nutrients out of the soil too fast. And so there's this concept of, gosh, I'm blanking on the name, and this is embarrassing, but it's a form of agriculture, permaculture, that I think is permaculture. It's tapping into, instead of replanting crops to harvest and eat from, it's just using crops that show up year after year after year. So there's this, the crops that you plant annually, then there's the crops that show up perennially, right? So perennial crops can be used in a way for us to harvest without having to replant and deplete the soil of its nutrients, and we stay in a balance with the ecosystem. It's hard to do. It's very hard to do, especially because there's places like Phoenix, Arizona. They don't have there's so many people there, but they don't have like the ability to feed themselves from crops just outside of the city, right? They have to import stuff from across the country just to survive. And so we're kind of stretching nature's ability to handle things and perform things like that, just left and right. And so being aware of that is the first step, right? So that's something we all need to do, is learn about it, but meet that with not a pessimism but an optimism, because knowing it allows you to actually do something. I'd rather go down swinging on something where I'm not able to make a difference, but I believe in it, versus believing in something and choosing not to do it because I'm not going to make a difference and everything falls apart, and I've got nobody to blame but someone else. No, I can only blame myself. So I don't know. Learn about this stuff. Try to do something about it as best you can. And I've got a lot of things to say about how there are things to do when you learn these things, not just to wallow in misery. So that's a lot. Did I make even a little bit of sense?
You made a lot.
Okay, good.
We're
I'm
not-
gonna grab a book. 1 second. Keep talking.
We're not that far off with the research. Just a specific. I feel like far gone.
I appreciated the way you described it at first. I haven't actually quite heard renewables described in that way, and I really like the way that you kind of phrased that. It kind of helps change the like the way that you said how renewables are mimicking nature, like using that as energy source that mimics nature as opposed to like the opposite. And it kind of helps like, because when you think renewables, you don't really think of it that way, because when you put it that way, it helps put it in a frame of mind where you feel like renewables can be a way or a source of energy that can replace these fossil fuels.
Right.
Whereas most people have this kind of like pessimistic views. Oh, it's just a wind turbine. Like we need oil,
Right.
you know.
And I'll be
So it
honest,
kind of
we will need oil and gas and fossil fuels for a very long time. It's just a matter of, are we going to nurture it and keep it around intentionally, or are we going to phase it out? Right now, we're not doing that near as much as we should. And the reason why it's going to be necessary for a long time is plastics. Plastics are made of petroleum-based, fossil fuel-based materials. Plastics are in everything. Your phone, your this device that we're speaking to each other through, the walls that surround us, everything about every commodity that every one of us owns was either made with fossil fuels in its production, or it was helped by fossil fuels in its transportation. Think about that. There's
damn.
not a there's
I,
not a single thing that is not true about.
Well, when you put it that way,
And so what do we have to do about that? Well, we've got to do a lot because again, fossil fuels is the primary source of energy that makes the world turn. Um, and so it's we can't shake a fist and throw all of the coal miners in West Virginia out on the cold the cold floor. Like I went to West Virginia and got to spend time with people who worked at coal mining operations, and it was shut down and they were just kicked out and no job, right? And they had injuries and they were trying to sue the coal company for money, and it was just a whole messy thing, and nobody was ever benefiting from it. And fossil fuels is this weird boom and bust is the like crux of what it does. I feel like is gives you like it's like a drug, right? It's a rush of energy where it's just a spike of, we can make heat, we can move a car and go, we can go, we can do everything with fossil fuels. And it's become this distortion of reality, and our relationship with the planet Earth has suffered, both in how we're polluting the air, but also in how it trained us to think that we have this false kind of abundance that we don't actually have. Now we have the abundance that's there. It's just a completely different kind, and it's going to take a lot of effort and time to make that transition, right? Because it is a transition from fossil fuels and scarce resources to solar, wind, and truly abundant renewable energy. I include nuclear in that, by the way. By the way, nuclear is way safer than people give it credit for, because it had Fukushima and then it had Chernobyl. So nuclear doesn't get a good rep, but I think it should, because it's probably, along with solar and all these others, very necessary in our transition away from so much fossil fuel use.
Nick, hate to cut you off. You mentioned those two nuclear power plant disasters. Drawing a blank, didn't we have one in the U.S. as well?
Yeah, there's been a whole number of them. It was the 3 mile long,
Yes,
the 3 Mile Island.
yes.
Uh,
One I'm trying to think of.
yeah, I don't know the details, but I think that was on Long Island. I really don't recall. I just hear 3 Mile Island, and that's what I think of. There's radioactive fallout here in Colorado on the north side of the Denver metro. There's getting towards Westminster, a little pocket of just radioactive zone. That it's not a brown zone, but there's like some government designation and name for it, where it's unsafe to be in, basically. And the surrounding area is just kind of oblivious, whether or not they're effective. by that radiation is unclear. There's radiation everywhere. And here's how we know through the fossil record that human impact is irreversible after the very first nuclear bomb was dropped. So I can't remember if that was Hiroshima or Nagasaki. I think it was
Hiroshima.
Hiroshima. Yeah, I think that was first. And after that date, it's carbon dated in the global fossil record. Every single soil sample on Earth that digs down, and gets a sample from 1945, it has a layer of radioactivity right there. And then there's like radioactive layers every bomb drop since. So it's really interesting to consider. There's a number of ways that humans have an impact on the planet Earth. And there's a number of ways that certain humans like to deny that impact, particularly with greenhouse gases. But there's no denying this whole nuclear fossil record thing. Um, it's what we call the Anthropocene. It's the chapter in the fossil record that indicates a new thing was going on, and that thing this time around was humans. In other eras, it was just different, hotter conditions, colder conditions, whatever. Um, so we know what's going on because we're dropping bombs, which is kind of crazy.
America.
Yeah, hell yeah,
Dropping
something
bombs.
like that. Oh yeah.
Nick, I've actually haven't quite heard about it that way, but you actually on our last episode talked about U.S. military pollution and the use of PFAs in Japan, where we're not being conscientious, whether it's a small thing like PFAs that are used to
What are
for.
PFAs?
I don't remember what it
Okay.
stands for, but it's what the military use. It's like some chemical name, but it's what the military uses to extinguish fires.
Gotcha.
And it's very harmful to troops. It leaked into rivers in Japan from Marine bases and U.S. military bases and even naval bases.
Yeah.
But it goes back to this point that you're saying is that when it comes to the environment, we always have this very short-term, narrow-minded focus about it. And like we don't think about the consequences of dropping a bomb, either than the human suffering, but what that means for our environment because the dirt is where we grow our food, and the nutrients that the plant gets from the dirt will move on to us. Like we hear about this time and time again. And it's kind of, I don't know, causation isn't correlation, but you think about how people with no cancer history have been developing all types of different cancers in the last 50, 60 years when they have no family history. You really start to think about, damn, like what is in the soil or what am I eating? And it seems that moving towards renewables also maybe alleviates some of that. And I could be wrong about that because I'm not knowledgeable on it. But as you're saying, it's mimicking nature. It's not harmful to our health to use as much of these energies or harvesting these energies as much as a fossil fuel. But I guess my next question is, going off of everything you say, I think there's this mindset where people are so used to fossil fuels, and you see like developing countries like China and India have a high need, and you said it yourself, is we do, like there is that necessity, but the general public's mindset hasn't quite shifted that, or maybe it's due to lobbyists, these company lobbyists. But how can we shift some of that public opinion on renewables and really get it to where you say we need it to be in order to have an improvement?
Yeah, so great question. The transition to renewable energies is inevitable kind of anyway. So that's the very first thing you really have to consider is non-renewable resources go away over time. We can't just wait 5 years and there's a bunch more fossil fuels let show up, right? We have to go
Sure.
find that. We have to find reserves and stores that over time, if that's all we're doing, then it's all gonna go away, right? And of course, it's important to realize that when we're getting 750 million year old dead plant and animal matter whose carbon makeup was what was in the atmosphere 750 million years ago when the planet was way hotter than it is now. We're getting back to that kind of wacky hot temperature, right? We're pulling that carbon back that was trapped over millions and millions of years and put underground. We're just like, nope, we want to just spew that into the atmosphere, right? So just consider the repercussions of what you're actually doing when you not just go to the gas pump, but go on a plane flight. There's a lot to it, and there's even more that should be done that can't be done by the typical individual, right? We can't make a change in the the way that we pursue renewables at the snap of a finger such that now all planes are electrified and they
Right.
don't need jet fuel, right? It's not
Right.
that easy. But that's what we all can conceive and see that needs to get done. It's just a matter of like, well, when's that gonna happen, right? Stressful. I don't know either. We're figuring that out.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, part of having small conversations like these is it does raise awareness, and as people become more aware, it does shift public opinion, and it's reflected in our representatives. I mean, the needle has moved quite far in a direction on renewable energies than even 5 years ago, if we're being real. So that's due to that raising of awareness that you're talking about. Like people haven't been having these conversations 10 years ago. I mean, there were, but not like
Not near
every
as
day,
much. Yeah,
you know?
I think it's
absolutely.
all you liberals trying to take my Hummer away.
And now Hummer came out with the electric Hummer, and that's pretty badass, I gotta say.
Did they really?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I would ride in that. I mean, I don't know who's riding a Hummer anyway. That thing got no gas mileage.
Negative gas mileage. You have to like drive with the gas pump in it. Anyway. Other questions?
Nick, I hate to go backwards, but when you said about the atomic bombings, how there was a layer of radiation, I know I brought this up to Julian before, like, when we've done all these atomic bomb tests around the world, like, how doesn't that like structurally change our planet? Like that big of an
Yeah.
explosion, how doesn't it change or like just flat out start destroying our planet? Is that
Right.
all? Like, are there more cause? Like, I'm sure there's more causes, but are there more specific ones you could bring to light besides like a coating of radiation on the
Right.
entire planet's soil?
So yeah, long story short, there is a dramatic change. It's not to the extreme severity that theoretically a nuclear bomb would have, right? When they first made the atomic bomb, they were worried that they were going to ignite the entire atmosphere on fire and burn everyone alive. But no, it's fine. They found that the
What?
the energy was contained enough that it was just a really hot singular point, and at that point, they found that the radiation would just kind of like flow with wind patterns and basically just coat the entire, downwind area with radiation. Both true in Japan with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as Fukushima when their nuclear plants went out. There's just this, it just bleeds, right? It's this bleeding effect of radiation. Um, and it mutates animals. It mutates babies of humans, right? In Fallujah, there, which is that Iran or Iraq?
Iraq,
Iran, Iraq.
Iraq.
Yeah. So Fallujah in Iraq, there were a bunch of skirmishes between U.S. soldiers and um, I don't even know which enemies of the Middle East, right? But when America came in guns blazing, they had nuclear tipped munitions and basically just sprayed up the whole fucking place. And like years later, not even like less than 9 months later, there were babies being born in that area that had deformities like 4 or 5 legs, like arms sprouting out of their forehead, like extreme deformities. Some of the worst I've ever seen. So what happens on a biological level, the DNA is getting messed up by this radiation, right? So that's ultimately what happens with these tests and why they have to do them typically in very remote places is to limit the harmful fallout.
For everybody that's listening or watching, if you don't know what Nick is talking about, Google "Children of Fallujah." That stuff did not get reported about enough on. Like, do your homework, go research that. Like, this shit's crazy.
You're talking about the nuclear tipped ammo?
Yep.
I wrote that down because I was like, I gotta look into this because I never heard about that shit.
Yep.
It's wild, man.
Phobia. I'll let him say this. I'll verify it on my own. Then Julian verified. I'm like, you know what he's talking about? What the fuck am I missing here?
It's pretty crazy. It's not okay.
It's insane, man. It's really insane.
So yeah, we're talking about a lot of different things, and nuclear is kind of interesting because it's a very pollutant thing in the case of the bomb, but it's also an incredible tool in the case of energy production, right? So
could it be the most efficient one if done right?
yeah, it certainly would be. Takes a lot to build a plant, right? It takes like hundreds of millions, if not 15 million or 15 years, just to start a nuclear power plant. And they aren't always kept in the safest of conditions, right? So they just kind of got this bad rap a little bit for a multitude of reasons, and
I blame the
right. Well, The Simpsons kind of normalized it, to be honest. Everyone's kind of like, it's
for you,
right?
Like, Trump won't be so bad,
right?
No, for joke's sake.
Yeah. So, yeah, nuclear is good. It's actually a very powerful thing. Nuclear is great, but it's also very pollutant, and it's one of the worst pollutants. But there's way worse, if not like significantly worse, pollutants out there that happen on a more regular basis. That happen in the form of dioxin when you burn trash, and certain things of that nature. Now there are ways to burn trash safely and cleanly, but there's just a whole lot to it, So, other questions? I don't want to have to ramble too much here.
You sure where I can just throw my bag of trash in a room and it creates energy cleanly?
I wish it were that easy.
Going to the back alley, I mean, it's fun when I got to go out there and smoke, but besides that, what's the point? Why not?
There's a lot of inefficiencies in breaking down just everyday trash into efficient fuel, but yeah,
I thought of one.
that'd be nice someday.
Do we want to maybe move on to global resource distribution?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is really big. Literally, it's the biggest thing. It's global resource distribution. Think about where things come from. Again, everything that we have in our possession, whether it's the air mattress that I'm sleeping on, the headboard on the bed frame, or the window, the door, the paint on the walls, everything about my lived experience, these products were produced with fossil fuels in their creation or in their transportation. So, life cycle analysis. What are the resources involved in not just the production of something, but its transportation? What is its actual footprint on the planet as it gets made, distributed, and used? And everything in my life, right, is part of this, what we call a treadmill of production, where there is a constant need for new things, new resources to get mined and to create the new iPhone, the new, laptop computer. It's a never-ending cycle, right? Because there's progress being made. And Moore's law, I believe it is, and I could be misremembering laws, but technology improves at an exponential rate, right? We're being able to store things on infinitely smaller size chips, and it's like every other year, and our TVs are getting way more higher def. Like it's $200 for like a 50-inch 4K TV, smart TV, versus like a fucking like bubble screen TV would be like $300 20 years ago. Not even like 10,
Right.
15 years ago. It's
Times
crazy.
Right.
2 times the back problems. I don't miss those TVs.
No, no. Just give me ones I can fold up, right?
Right.
Stuff it in my pocket.
TV should be a 2 moving job.
Yeah, so think about it. When you think about that TV that came from China or wherever, or Taiwan, or all these manufacturing giants, globally speaking, right? They're having to get their resources from somewhere. They have to, in a lot of cases, go to Africa and get their mined resources like copper and wiring and gold and precious metals that take a lot to acquire, both in terms of cost to the planet and in terms of social costs. The ladder of who's involved, or rather the chain of who's involved, not everybody's getting special treatment, right? In fact, it's pretty rare along that way that people are getting everything that they need out of the transaction. So there's a lot of instances in these African countries where mining is running rampant for these precious metals. In that process, there's a lot of waste that gets generated when you're mining for precious metals. And that can sometimes be radioactive, not typically, but it causes health issues for these African natives, right? And they're having to bear that cost on their health when they're just kind of being forced into this situation, right? They didn't really ask to have these precious metals in their backyard. They didn't ask to have Bill Gates and Microsoft and all these other tech giant companies to come and say, hey, we're the good guys, trust us, here's malaria vaccines, and all these other
Yeah.
things that are more performative than truly impactful. And we have a big global resource distribution network that's caked up with crime and destitution and just kind of like taking off the backs of the working poor. And that's globally speaking. In America, it's gotten worse in comparison to, say, Europe. But even Europe has its own issue of, taking its wealth, perceived wealth, from the backs of the poor. And that's most rich countries, most rich organizations, rich entities. They have to get their power and their capital from other people, other things that serve them, right? And so the power of renewable energy, as people own it for themselves, is they're able to break that cycle. They're able to, instead of earning or working on someone else's dream, they're able to become independent if in the process of owning their full source of energy, their full source of food, their full source of water, right? If you're fully self-sufficient, what do you have to work for anymore?
Nick,
True.
the possible incentive why some companies or countries want these resources to be the main backbone? Like, you depend on us, and if things change, it's going to be bad for us. I'm just getting a little conspiratorial. Had a couple.
No, well, rephrase that question. I don't think I understood the front of the question. What were you asking?
So you're kind of saying, oh, there it is. I lost my train of thought.
Happens every episode.
Every episode. It kind of comes down to like, the people will depend on you, like with the energy, right? The more you
And
go down along those lines, the more you are dependent on.
what do you mean? Who's you? Are you talking about me, Nick Tvrdy? Are you talking about?
That's this whole question.
No,
Okay.
I think what Ryan's getting at is that countries that say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, is countries that produce oil or produce certain natural resources, it's in their best interest to make other countries dependent on those natural resources, right? Because you take a country like Venezuela or countries like the Saudi, UAE, which I'm right next to right now, that their entire economy is based on the fossil fuels. And when it's in their best interest to make sure that the rest of the world stays dependent on oil, otherwise these billionaires aren't billionaires anymore. And you can take that big scale, but you can also kind of condense it into a smaller scale with the lobbying power of these coal companies, these natural resource extraction, and as you were saying, in parts of Africa, where these companies are mining, like I forget the material that's used in iPhones for the chips. What are those called? There's a specific material that's called starts with an S. I'm blanking on the name, but it's used in the chips for computers and for cell phones, and it's mined in Africa. But as you're saying, it's these people aren't getting equal wages for anything, but they're making it seem like we have to have phones in order to keep that process going. And I think that's kind of what Ryan's trying to get at is it's in companies, states, people's best interests to make you feel like you're dependent. And that kind of fuels this global resource distribution that you've been speaking on.
This right here is one of the most impactful things that anyone could watch. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's the extraction through sale, use, and disposal. All stuff in our lives affects communities at home and abroad, yet most of it is hidden from view. So the story of stuff, this is just like a 20-minute, fast-paced, fact-filled look at the underside of our production and consumption patterns. The story of stuff exposes the connections between a huge number of environmental and social issues and calls us together to create a more sustainable and just world. It'll teach you something, it'll make you laugh, it may change the way you look at stuff in your life forever. The story of stuff.
Story of stuff.
Yeah, I can share that with you, and you can share that with the audience. The real gist of it is that the lesson to be learned about the life cycle analysis of goods and services, particularly all these resources that come from other continents. When we understand that process, it gives me great pause personally. It makes me very upset. It makes me very appalled. It makes me scared. It makes me a little bit nervous because what are we going to do instead, right? How are we going to stop? How are we going to transition away in a way where people can keep their luxuries and be happy and not feel like they're totally attacked, and we can make good choices for Mother Earth, right? So to talk about conscientiousness and coming into one's own, right? And
Right. So,
understanding who you are, big
yes.
topic.
I was very excited about this topic of conscientious and coming into one's own because in the age of technology where we're becoming increasingly less self-aware, it's this weird dichotomy of there are so many resources to become self-aware, but the resources you use make you not come into your own, like a cell phone. And I know that's like a typical answer, but there's a lot of truth in that. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about conscientious and coming into your own. I think it'll be a good discussion. And I know a lot of people, especially during this pandemic will connect to that.
Yeah, so awareness of self, of other, of things, right? And conscientiousness is, it's pretty linked. Meditation and like becoming aware of your body, like body work, whether it's dancing or athletics, or if it's just yoga and stuff of that nature. There are so many different ways to increase your conscientiousness. And ultimately, it's just this recognition, this meta cognition, which allows you to just know who you are, right? So it's the people who are most conscientious that if they don't know who they are, they know what they want to do for the world. They know how they want to be for other people. I think of stereotypical saints, throughout history, those are just really nice people, right? They might not care about their wants and desires. They might not have that figured out more or less, but they're conscientious. They're aware of other people's needs. And so there's this book that I came across but haven't even read called To Know as We Are Known. And so it's education as a spiritual journey. Now, I didn't read this, but this was the context for when I did read this book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram. And these are really cool tools that say, hey, not everybody learns the same way. And so back in college, you remember Annie Diamond, right, Julian? Diamond was an old resident director for Cortina and for
The best resident director.
She was awesome, and she was so wise and helped me learn a lot because she basically took this book and turned it into an outside of college class. So it wasn't like a credit class where you sign up in the typical way, but it was like 20 different people that got together and talked about their experience growing up with their specific personality. It was the Enneagram is 9 different personality types, as you can see here on this diagram. And we had like 2 or 3 of each. And it was pretty remarkable to be able to put us all in one setting where we get to know, how each person thinks and feels. We became more aware, of ourselves. Oh my gosh, totally of ourselves first and foremost, but then also of all these other people. And so this is a tool, right, that allows us to know other people as in the same way that we might know ourselves. And this book right here is that, concept is something that's going to help you transform your life. To know as we are known is to listen. It's to be fully present to what somebody has going on and how they're processing any new concept, right? In the case of education. So these are really, really helpful. Contextually speaking, this is a great tool along with Myers-Briggs, the 5 love languages, Strengths Finder, the Big Five. There's a whole lot of personality type indexes that are just really great for, they're not restrictive. In my opinion, I don't think that they should be used to prescribe who someone is. They should be used to observe and describe. So when people are saying with personality types like, oh, you're this type, you're that type, you're this type, slow down, right? You don't want to confuse somebody because you don't know them, they know them. And so what you need to kind of do together is help that person learn what all the different types are, and then just kind of present different scenarios that allow them to choose between the differentiating qualities. So like my friend Stephanie, for example, she was like, hey, Nick, I just took a test. Am I an 8 or a 2? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's figure it out. So, and then I asked her a question. In a moment of crisis, how do you experience a fight or flight or freeze, right? The typical response to experiences of trauma. It's crazy how much your type psychology is tied and wired to your everyday behaviors. And so learning about it allows you to deal with it in a much more healthy way versus letting it control you. You're kind of in control of it, more or less. It's not about control. It's really about surrender. So it's cool.
No, absolutely. It's actually funny you bring that up. So I was, before the pandemic, I worked for a nonprofit. And one of the things that we had to do during training was do a lot of these personality type things.
Yeah.
But the reason for it, and I like the way it was framed, it was in a way that you framed it as well, was it was a way to better at our job. We all live together and you're always working together, and we have a bad habit of when we see somebody's pattern of behavior or pattern of personality, we have a habit of making that characteristic trait quality as a negative, or holding it in a negative light to blame them for being who they are. Really, it's just we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. And humans, where we have DNA, and it's learning to like harvest that. And as you were saying, like identify it, not because you're better or worse for it, just so that you know how to, I know how to deal with myself better and you know how to deal with me better. And it's, as you say, I like that way, the word you use, surrender. It goes a long way, I think, especially in the workplace, because we have a really bad habit of using people's personalities against them and characterizing people based on their personality. And it's usually we do that if we're on different ends of the personality,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not because like you'll see these two people work better together than these two people,
Yeah.
uh, right? But it's not. It's because you're on the opposite ends, not really anything else. And once you know that, and you really actually see that, it goes a long way. I think in work, in your work life, and personal life too, of course. But I saw it really help in my work life.
So yeah, conscientiousness and that sort of stuff is great in a a workaday world sense, right? Operational of just going out and having a good, healthier work relationship, or even romantic relationships and those sorts of things. But to get more spiritual about it, yeah, like conscientiousness, like the power of now. I don't know if you've ever heard of this dude, Eckhart Tolle. He's got this book, and I've got the sequel to this book, that talks about presence and how stepping into your body and being aware of what your body is made of, being aware of that as opposed to being stuck in your ego, which is your thoughts and your emotions, right? You can tap into joy, you can tap into love, and this, as he describes it, Christ spirit. So like when Jesus came, um, supposedly according to this dude from Germany, who's talking about Christianity in general. He thinks that Christ came and was a perfect embodiment of someone who is fully present all the time. And in
Mm.
and in that true full presence, Jesus was grounded in this Christ spirit, which is this notion that we all have of like, you're my brother, you're my sister, like we're the same. Like I I'm a human, you're a human. There's value to that. We are all part of that same consciousness. It's a collective human consciousness, right? That some of us just know inherently about growing up. Some of us take drugs to find out about it. Some of us never find out about it. Personally, it's hard for me to ignore because, you know, I did mushrooms one time, many times, and it was a great time because it was just like this clear feeling that I'm not I'm not this island when I'm living here on Earth, right? I came from my parents came from their parents, and there's just this big massive network of connections just waiting to happen. It's almost like a simulation where, when you go out into the real world and something crazy happens and it feels like a glitch in the matrix, it's just like that's cool, it's just part of the way that the universe exists. I don't know. I'm kind of speaking out my butt right now.
Did you
I
do
have
some shrooms?
no.
Nah.
Believe it or not, when you brought up conscientiousness earlier, I was like, do I ask him about the good stuff?
Well, do you all know about stoned ape theory?
I
No,
do not.
I
Edu-
guess at it off the name, but
So
educate
here's
us.
Ape
here,
Theory
yeah. So here's
sounds like an episode of Joe Rogan.
right. Stoned ape theory. So it's this concept that in the human genome, as you go back species after species to like what we were before we were fully human. So we evolved from monkeys, right? There was this massive growth in brain capacity from one species of monkey to the next, and they couldn't figure out why. There was nothing clear about anything more than shrooms being in the diet. And so they ate mushrooms that actually made them trip, and they feel like in that process they developed newer neural pathways that allowed for a higher level of cognitive function. And they would eat more meat over time, and the fat would allow them to like have more brain fat to again function a bit more efficiently. Yeah,
Right.
Stone Ape Theory. Believe it or not, that's where they think language came from. This capacity for us to make words and labels and then kind of share them and create a whole new world. That's what Stone Ape Theory is supposedly based off of. And if y'all didn't know this, shrooms are their mycelium networks, which is what their spores are connected with underground. Those are the largest organisms on Earth. And so aspen trees, I don't know if you know this.
For humans.
What was that?
Nothing. I should have had my Alex Jones hat on.
Oh, okay. Oh, Alex Jones, nice.
Oh, back in our first couple weeks of running this show, I had a good old tinfoil hat.
Nice. That's the way to do it, man.
Yeah, any theories I have, which are usually conspiracy theories, throw on a hat.
Yeah, right?
Case mushrooms are giving you experiences of the last humans. Duh.
That's funny. Dude, it's crazy to think what this network though when you tap into it of this mushroom network, because you're like talking about having experiences of different humans when you're tripping out, right, and tripping on drugs. And there's like a lot of people like myself included who have done mushrooms psychoactively and had like a Jesus or a God experience, or a Christ thing where I was like chanting to myself om and just like meditating and just like tripping hard and just like seeing with my third eye, my mind's eye, just like this glowing energy source that felt like the birth of all things good, like this primordial essence and power that all things came from. And that to me felt like God and Christ's spirit and this consciousness that we all tap into. But that's just my lived experience.
Everyone out
That
there,
was like a month ago.
Either two different trips I've experienced. The third eye, where you see everything that you didn't see, or the third ear, where you hear everything you don't want to hear.
Ah, no third noses, please. Right? I don't want to smell the things I don't want to smell.
I'm done. I'm done with your ass, Ryan.
Girlfriend dumped you because you're an idiot and she's a bitch.
Oof.
All right. Well,
Drugs.
I haven't tried, but everyone out there, tap into that mycelium network.
Yeah, you did the best drug.
What? What are you talking about?
You did malaria. That shit gives you near-death experiences, yo.
Yeah, except it's real, not fake.
Right. How much can you get? Stuff is like heroin. You can't get more real than that.
You had malaria? What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a long story.
Okay.
He must have been the guy you were calling after me.
It's a long story. Anyway, we'll tell that story on the podcast one day. So Nick, thanks. It's a really interesting segment with conscientiousness, and we'll be sure to, if people want to check them out, the ones that you brought up. I think the last thing encapsulates a little bit what we talked about is the act of growing up and why it's significant. And I guess could you kind of start off of what do you mean? I mean, we kind of all know what growing up means, but like, what does it really mean?
I think about this a lot, guys. So I think of all the things that my mom and dad taught me when I was very young and literally growing up in size. And it would be things like turn the lights off when you leave the house, pick up after yourself. Things that indicate conscientiousness, right? When you are growing up and you become an adult, you don't have to just get told to do those things that are just obvious, right? It's kind of weird to me that at work, there's a lot of people who leave the light on in a place that they're not in, right? That we've
Mm,
got a little kitchen inlet at the office space, and people just leave the light on in there all day, and I'm like, you're not in there, why are you leaving the light on? It's just like a small lack of conscientiousness, whatever you want to call it, awareness, whatever. And it's emblematic of our entire world culture. I would say in particular the American culture, where we kind of take resources
yeah.
and things for granted, right? And we have this immature, childlike entitlement for resources, and for
Mm,
comforts, and for the luxuries that we've definitely taken for granted. It's just mind-boggling the things that we have compared to even 100 years ago, let alone 50 years ago or even 5 years ago with technology, right? It's just we're moving at a breakneck speed, and we're kind of losing our ability to grow with our technology in a healthy way.
That's for sure.
definitely.
TikTok is just a very, very easy, low-hanging fruit example to point to and say, oh, that look at all these teenage kids like dancing and looking sexy and all these things that are just like not okay for their future, whatever you want to describe it as. Even if that's true or not true, it doesn't even matter. It's just very emblematic. We're just moving way too fast. So how do we grow up in a way where we're not outpacing ourselves? Well, we got to do things like learn about our personality types. We need to learn about other people's personality types. We need to learn about our impact on the planet. We need to learn about basically the things that don't get taught on a regular basis. And that's just what are the things that have an impact? We like to ignore our negative impacts first and foremost, and we don't have a clear understanding of what our positive impacts can and should be. So I don't know. Growing up with regards to the global structures, looks like slowing down production, changing production over from an industrialized, mechanized, fossil fuelized,
Mm,
production way of doing things to more of like the harmonized, live with the balance of the natural surroundings and work within those resource caps, right? So that's like literally growing up in a physical sense so
right.
that we can grow up in our relationship with the planet Earth. Because right now our relationship with planet Earth is kind of like a young, dumb, fast and quick, dirty relationship where we're not treating each other well, right?
Hmm.
We're not taking the chance to fall in love with planet Earth and actually, treat this planet like a lover, where that lover in turn takes care of us. And, that's what we're called to do in Scripture. Genesis chapter 3, no, chapter 2, verses, just like the first couple bits of Genesis, talk about being a good steward of the earth, and that gets lost on us. And to me, that's growing up. I just think of my dad. He would always take me out into the world wherever we would go, and we see a little bit of trash, and he'd be like, "Oh, go grab that. Gotta keep it beautiful, right? If there was trash around Omaha, keep Omaha beautiful, right?" It just was stuck in my brain that you're worse off ignoring it than you are better for it for picking up some trash, if that makes sense.
It does. My dad told me to go pick up that quarter.
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
Your dad cared about the environment. My grandpa wanted some money. So we
No, gosh, that's funny.
hey, the quarter there. Go pick that fucker up.
That's funny. So,
Nick, you said something that really like made me think about something. When you talk about impact and how that relates to conscientiousness, and like one of the things that I hate to sound like old man speaking to young people, but even us people at our age are guilty of this. When with technology and social media and the internet, it is so easy to do something and not think about the impact, right? Like, for example, typing a very negative comment about somebody or
mm,
being so super negative. There's a huge difference between being super negative to someone's face and typing a comment because I can't see the immediate impact of
right.
writing. And that also connects because it's a mindset too, is where, and it goes back to this idea of you've been speaking of becoming self-aware, becoming self-conscientious, understanding impact that you have. Because a small thing like that, like a piece of trash, not throwing it in a recycling bin, like if we're not able to recognize that because of this short twitch brain memory we have now, where everything doesn't have a big measure of impact because it's so easy not to. We're so incentivized not to, like, I mean, it's so easy to write a negative comment and talk shit. And that mentality kind of gets transferred over. And that's why I appreciate you bringing up this idea of conscientiousness because we've kind of seen a little reawakening, I think, with it, but it's not taught in schools, right? There isn't like, if there needs to be like a meditation class, there needs to be like
A
these
philosophy
kids.
class, even.
Absolutely,
Gotta get these
absolutely.
kids thinking. Yeah.
And I think the word impact they used is perfect because it can make us think about maybe there is an impact of what I'm doing as opposed to always just doing. And
Well,
we don't.
there always will be, and that's something that I love helping people realize is your impact can always improve, and that's what we think of when we say, that man has impact, right? It usually is a good, positive impact. But think about this: no matter what you're doing in life, it has a ripple effect,
Right?
right? So you always have an impact. It's just you got to be in alignment with it. This is what I mean by growing up and being conscientious, and all these things are so closely related because your intentions, when you live conscientiously, match your actions, which then match your impact. When you are
Mm.
unconscious, when you're unaware and you're fumbling through life and you have these intentions, right? But then you act out of your ego with anger when you're trying to help somebody. Listen, I just want to help you, right? Your actions don't match your intentions, and so your impact is way off and causes more harm than it helps. And
True.
so that's why this whole consciousness thing is so powerful, is it allows us to be in greater congruence and alignment with ourselves and
Mm.
with in my opinion, the spirit of God. But that's just me. So yeah.
Well, Nick, I know you've haven't had much sleep today, so I want to make sure you get your rest.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Uh,
our co-host is lying. Julian wants to go to bed.
No, I'm so tired.
oh
I'm so tired.
no, I think both Nick and I are both so tired.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
So
but we really appreciate you, Nick, for coming on the podcast. Everybody give a cheers for Nick for coming on
Yes,
and educating us. And
cheers to you guys.
shout out to you. We really appreciate it. Hope to have you on some time again.
Yeah, I love the idea of doing it. So y'all have a good one. Thanks for having me on, and we'll chat in the future.
yes, sir.
Peace. Thanks, Nick.
Bye.
All right, bye bye.
We'll catch up on the malaria story.